Hi, I'm Teresa Coates. I'm the National Educator for Shannon Fabrics, and today I'm excited to be here at Missouri Star Quilt Company. We're going to be making a couple of Santa projects. This one is going to be the Santa hat, which is perfect for all of your Christmas celebrations. Make a few. Totally fun. You're going to use 1 yard of both the Luxe Cuddle hide and 1 yard of the Luxe Cuddle dazzle to be able to make 2 different projects. So we're going to make a Santa hat and a Santa bag. We're going to use both fabrics for both of those projects, and now I'm going to start with the Santa hat. So some of my favorite tools for working with Cuddle are the clover flower head pins. I always want to make sure and have a stretch needle, 9014 stretch needle. These are from Schmetz, which I really like. The By Annie basting tape, which we're going to use in some different ways than you might expect. Polyester thread, a point turner, one of my favorite tools, which is the By Annie stiletto, rotary cutter, 45mm rotary cutter, the perfect scissors from Karen K. Buckley, and I like the medium size, which are the blue handle, and a felt tip marker, and this time we're just using a Sharpie. So first I'm going to start with the pattern. So I have the PDF pattern, and I've downloaded all of those pattern pieces, and I went ahead and cut it out and taped it together already, but if you get the PDF, you're going to have all of the pattern pieces. You're going to cut them out along those lines and then tape them together to create the pattern. The printed version will include a full-size pattern. So once I have the pattern cut out, I have the hat body template, and I also have the hat pom-pom template. And I'm going to use both of these today with the different fabric, and we're going to start with the red. So I want to make sure that you pre-wash your red Luxe Cuddle. I would recommend that you pre-wash all red fabric because it tends to be over-dyed to get it a really nice red vibrant color. And if you wash it, you'll be able to wash out any of those extra dyes. It won't always bleed, but it's better to be careful and pre-wash beforehand. So go ahead and pre-wash this, and then we'll cut it out. You're going to wash it in cold water and a low heat dryer. You'll be ready to go. All right, so I'm going to unfold this, and I'm going to check first which way my nap is going. So because the Luxe Cuddle hide has variation, it's embossed, so the nap is kind of going in all sorts of different ways. It's a little harder to tell, but mostly I want to pet it and see how does that feel. Does it feel smooth? How does that one feel? It feels a little nicer this direction, so I'm going to say that my nap is going this way. One of the things that I like to do when I'm working with the Cuddle fabrics is to actually mark the direction of my nap. So I'm just going to use my felt tip marker here and draw a little line that tells me this is the way my nap is. So then when I have to reference back to it, I have something that'll tell me which way it goes. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring this up and lay it out nice and flat so that I can get my pattern on there. This project works so that you're going to get the 2 projects out of the same yardage. So we want to make sure that when we're cutting this first piece that we're giving ourselves enough room to get that Santa bag out there as well. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put my Santa hat clear over at the edge, make sure I'm using all the fabric that I can, and I'm going to trace this out first. So I'm actually going to trace it upside down first because I want to make a line here that will be my fold, but I'm not actually going to put it on the fold. I like to really trace out and cut my Cuddle fabric 1 layer at a time. So I'm going to go ahead and lay this over here. And I can use my ruler to make sure that it's basically straight so that my fold is kind of straight up the fabric here. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to trace around it. And I'm going to make a little mark up here and a little mark at the bottom that is my fold line. And now I'm just going to go ahead and trace around this. I'm just going to hold it here. It's totally fine. If you want to put something heavy on it, some pattern weights, you can. I don't recommend pinning to the fabric just because it makes the fabric distort a lot because it's thicker. So I just kind of hold it there, and then we're going to flip this over. Line those back up with where they were for the first side. So that's my fold line. And I'm going to go ahead and finish tracing all the way up here. And again, I'm just kind of holding it very lightly against the side of the fabric. against the side of the pattern, tracing down. And now I've got my hat template traced. So now I'm going to cut it out. I'm going to go ahead and use my Karen K. Buckley scissors, which I like so much. They're micro serrated scissors, so they cut the fabric really nicely. They have a little grip to it as you go. So I'm just going to go ahead and use those. I'm going to start here so I don't have to cut in very far. And I'm just going to try to cut mostly the backing and not all of the fibers on the front. So I kind of just put it underneath the edge and do little snips all the way across. And as I cut here, it's just going to cut mostly the backing, like I said, and not the fibers on the front. So I'm going to make a lot less mess. And it's going to leave those fibers on there, which you can see along this edge here. So when I've cut it, cutting the backing has let those fibers stay on there. If I were to cut this with a rotary cutter, all of these fibers would be loose, which you can absolutely do and then just vacuum up the edges. But I find the scissors to be less messy and very easy to use. All right, so now once I've got it cut out, I'm going to go ahead and cut off this little tail of fabric and then put it to the side. This is just kind of a little extra. If I get it out of my way, it'll be easier to fold up here. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and fold this, put this to the side, and come back to it later for the Santa sack. All right, so now our piece is cut for the actual hat. You can see there's not a lot of mess. I'm going to go ahead and just wipe that up, give my Santa hat a good little shake, and set that aside. So now I'll cut out the hat band and the pom-pom. So with that, I'm using the Luxe Cuddle High Dazzle, which is really fun because it has a little sparkle going with it, which makes it a little extra, and I really like that. So for the hat band, I'm going to cut a piece that is 10 by 25 inches, and then I'm going to use the pattern to cut out the pom-pom. So I'll trace that out with my pen and cut it out again with my scissors. Okay, so I have a little bit of extra right here. It's not quite straight on the edge, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to trim that off with my rotary cutter just because it's easier than trying to mark and trim a tiny little piece with my scissors. But you can see it'll make a lot more mess when I cut it with the rotary. So I'll go ahead and get that out of the way now. All right, so now I'm going to measure it 10 by 25, and I'm going to mark just a tiny blip there and a tiny blip there. Measure this out 1 more inch so that I have actually 25. And then I'll lay my ruler above it 1 more time to get to 10 inches. I've got a 5-inch ruler. Make sure it's going to be 10 inches over here. Go ahead and draw that line, mark it, and add the 1 inch at the end. Okay, so here's my hat band all drawn out. I'm going to go ahead and pull this up and trace my pom-pom circle as well. And again, with the same idea, so we're just going to kind of hold it in place, trace around it. The joy of working with Cuddle is that the seam allowance can be a little not perfect, and we're fine. So if we didn't cut this out perfectly in a circle, it's going to be all right. It's going to work out just fine. So we don't have to be as precise as we sometimes do with cotton. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this the same way that I did before, with little snips up here and leaving the nap on the back. All right, so now that I've got both pieces cut out, give them a good little shake. Get rid of some of that cuddle mess. And refold my fabric for the next project. All right. Okay, so now I have my pom-pom fabric. It's a little circle. We're gonna put that aside because we're gonna tackle that later. All right, so now I've got my hat band, and the pom-pom, which we're going to end up making this little guy. Super cute. I'm gonna put it on. Because it's adorable, right? Super cute, lovely little hat. Super fun. All right, let's see if I can keep my hair halfway decent. All right, so I've got the hat piece here and I've got the band, and we're gonna sew these two pieces together. Because they are two different shapes, the hat band is straight across and the hat itself is kind of curved. It's gonna be a little bit funky to do. So the first thing I want to do is find the center of both of those. And I'm just going to do that by folding them in half and marking them with a pin. I'll fold the hat in half here. Stick a little pin right in the fold. And I'll do the same here. Let me check my nap, and I'm going to go ahead and mark that. It's going to be here, and I'm going to mark it way over in the edge on this one in what will be my seam allowance. But I want the part where the nap is coming down to continue with the hat. So I'm going to fold that in half, find where that top is, the top center. And I'm going to put a pin in. I'm also going to fold this, and I'm going to mark the center over here with my pen, and I'm going to do that not with the straight pin. I'm going to do it with my ink pen because I want this to be seen later, and I'm afraid that my pin will just fall out because this is going to get flopped around for a while. So just going to mark that with the ink pen. I'm also going to make sure that it stays within the seam allowance so that that doesn't show later should it come through. Okay, so now I've got my centers marked. Obviously my ends are going to be the same. I'm going to pin the center first. So match up those pins, take one, pin it through both. Then I'm going to go ahead and pin the corner. And then I'll do the same thing over here. Then we'll just divide this up and pin in between and make that ease to match. So I'm going to go ahead and pin this with the pins straight out. So I'm pinning perpendicular to the cut edge, which often when I'm working with Cuddle, I will pin it parallel. But because this is a curve, I find it a lot easier to pin the pins perpendicular. So I'll put the pin here. So this was the center, and then this was the center of this half, and then I pin it in the middle of that. So I just kind of keep subdividing it and making it so that the pins are every couple of inches. I really want to control the fabric, and that's pretty easily done by using the pins and pinning in a, I don't know what the right word is, pinning in a, and pinning in a organized, yeah, and pinning it in a way that makes sense for my brain and also keeps it so that I don't have to ease too much. It's going to keep it nice and even as I'm working, and that's important. So again, finding it, making it match up, finding the center, pinning it through, and then I'll pin in between those as well. All right, so on this side, we've got the curve nice and pinned. And on this side, you can see it's still nice and even. Now I'm going to go ahead, I pinned from one side, but I'm going to actually sew from this side, take those pins out as I go. But as I work, I want to be able to sew it and be able to see all of the extra fabric that is on this side so I can make sure that I'm not catching that and getting any little puckers in there. So if you have a larger piece or a differently sized shape, sometimes it's easier to put that on the top. I will say that it really depends on how it works for you. So I would suggest that you sew it one way and then see if that works. And if it doesn't work as well, try it the other way. All right, so let's go over to the machine. And I've got the machine set up with my walking foot. I have it at a 3.5 stitch length on just a straight stitch. I've got the 9014 stretch needle in here and polyester thread in both my spool and my bobbin. Okay, so I'm going to put this underneath the foot here. I'm going to lift my foot up just a little bit extra, make sure it gets underneath there nicely, maybe. There we go. Make sure it gets underneath there. I'm going to use the edge of my walking foot as my 1/2 inch seam allowance, because that's easier for me to see than any sort of marking on the machine. You can double check and make sure that your walking foot is about that. Generally speaking, that's a pretty good estimate of what the size will be. I also put the fabric in probably about a 1/2 inch, and then I'll back stitch and go forward. So we'll take a few stitches backward, then we'll start going forward. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take out these pins as I go. See if I can get this to sew a little faster. There we go. So I'll take these out, make sure I can stop my machine, pull my pins out. I don't have to keep sewing, but you can. You'll also want to use the stiletto to kind of keep the fabric flat as it feeds underneath the foot. I find that it works really well to keep the cuddle where I want it to be, to make sure that it's staying nice and smooth along this side and that the edges are matching. All right, and as I come to the end here, I'm gonna get up to the edge, I'll back stitch a few stitches, come to the end and take it out. All right. I've got it sewn all the way across. Here's my band. Now, as you can see, the shapes are different, so they're going to work a little bit differently, and that's totally fine. This is what it should look like. Now we're going to go ahead and I'm going to pin these and pin up this side. So I'm going to fold these out. Make sure that my edges are matching here. And I'm actually going to fold them toward the band, because when I finish this, I'm going to bring the band around and we're going to hide those seam allowances. So I'm going to push them toward the hat band and pin those in place. As always, I kind of want to pin the important places first, which is going to be centers and ends, and then ease in between. So I want to make sure that those are matching here. And I'll get that laid out nice and flat. So this is a nice long straight stretch of sewing. So I'm going to go ahead and double pin this where I pin parallel to the raw edge. And then I'll go ahead and do a second row of pins. And what I have found is that this really does help it to ease through the machine much easier and keep all of my layers of cuddle nice and even. Pin this, and then I'm going to, I'll sew down here, we'll transition here and go straight down this edge. So again, I'm going to sew or pin the end and then pin in between. First along that raw edge and then a second row just past. So now it's pinned, and I will start up here. We'll sew all the way down again with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Put my fabric underneath here just a little bit, just so I can back stitch. Put my foot down, back stitch just a few up to that edge. And then this is because this corner is a little, it's a small corner and it's with the Cuddle fabrics, which is knit, so it wants to kind of move a little bit. I'm going to make sure and use my stiletto to keep it moving straight through at that corner, and then just work my way forward. As I sew this, if I've pinned the double pins correctly, this second row of pins will kind of slide underneath the foot and control the fabric in a way that I can't otherwise. So that second row of pins will stay in unless you're going to run over the heads, and then you should definitely take them out. We don't want to sew over our pins at all, but I can just leave that in to hold the fabric and control it as I'm sewing. As I get down here, this is going to be an extra thick seam join. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 6 layers of Cuddle right here. So I'm going to make sure and keep my stiletto in the fabric there to hold it. I'm going to kind of stop where the seams join, and I'm going to pivot just a little bit so I can come straight down this side now. Again, using my stiletto to make sure that it feeds underneath there nicely. Then just straight down the side. Again, I leave those second rows of pin in just to control the fabric. Get to the end, back stitch, and pull it out. So now I've still got these pins. I've still got the pins along here that were the double row of pins. I'll take those out. But you can see how evenly it kept the fabric as we went. All right, so now I need to flip this up so that I can top stitch this in place. There are a couple ways of doing this. I found a couple of ways that work really well. One of them is using that basting tape that I really like. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna put some of that along the seam edge here to kind of hold the band as it comes up, and will require less pinning as I'm sewing around it, which I really do like. So let me pull that out. I'll show you how that works. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to take my by Annie basting tape. And what I really like about this is it's extra sticky, which is really nice, but it's also only 1/8 of an inch wide. So it's really narrow and it's easy to control. So I'm going to take a little strip of it here and I'm going to put it right underneath the seam that I sewed the hat to the hat band. And I'm just going to put it on here just a little bit at a time. So what I like to do is not try to go too far because I can only control a little bit of the fabric at a time. So I definitely give myself some ease by making different strip lengths as I go along here. Okay. And we'll get this, just press it in place. And one of the things that I also want to note is that I want to find the center of the hat here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mark it. If you remember, we did that with the band, and we want those to match up later. So here's my center mark and my center mark, and we'll match those up as well. All right. So I'm going to work my way around here. Do another little section with the basting tape. And really all this does is makes it a little bit easier, and I have less pinning I have to do. Make sure I can still see my center mark there. Turn it, and this does not have to be obviously very neat or in a perfect position. It is basting tape. It will just sit there and hold the fabric for you for a little while until we sew it. So the pattern gives us directions that you can also hand sew this, and you can absolutely just pull this up and do a little whip stitch all the way around if you enjoy hand sewing, that's a great way of doing that and not having to do any top stitching. All right. So now we can come back to the beginning where we were. To get that to stick down where very well. Come on, little guy. Hold on. Okay, so then I'll just pull the tape off here, and I'm just going to work with it a little at a time. So I'm going to go ahead and bring the edge of the hat band up to here, make my seam line match, and then go ahead and press that in place using the basting tape to keep it where I want it to be. And I'm going to work my way around one bit at a time. So I just want to make sure, press that real well. You can use the end of your pressing tool here, the stiletto, and then the other end is the pressing tool. I use the little stiletto to kind of pull that paper up, get it started. And then keep putting that hat band in place. What you want to make sure that you're not doing is not stretching it at all. So be careful just to kind of lift it up and over, lining it up with your seam and getting that to adhere. And here I've got the center seam. Oops, come on, little guy. There we go. All right, so here I've got the mark for my center of the hat, and I've got my mark for the center of the band to make sure that those match together. And then adhere it along the way. So I know that now it's centered, should work out just fine. Again, I'll stick it on, just matching that raw edge, basically with the seam line. If it doesn't match up perfectly, it really is just fine. Okay, go ahead and get my last strip on. All right, so now it's basted in position. I could go ahead and I could pin a few times, and I'm gonna do that just to make sure that it stays kind of where I want it to. But you can see it'll stay really nicely with that basting tape. I really do like it's extra sticky. And what that does is allows me to pin a whole lot less as I go around here. So now I'm going to take it over to the machine and we're going to top stitch that in place. We're going to do this kind of like we do with cuddle bindings, just bringing it over those seam allowances and zigzagging it in place. Like I said, you can absolutely hand sew this, but it's really fast and easy with the machine. So we'll do that. I'm going to set up the zigzag so that it is a larger zigzag. So we're going to make it as wide as we can, and the same length. So I like to do it, so if it's a 4 wide, I'm gonna make it 4 long. You could do 4.5 or 5. That works as well. I don't suggest going any smaller than 3.5 for this kind of, for this technique, just because it will hold it just fine when it's a bigger stitch and it will be easier to sew. So I will start with the seam. That's where I'm gonna start, just because that's gonna be the part that will be not quite as neat, and that's totally fine. So we'll kind of put that all together at the end. If you wanted to, if you have a free arm, this is absolutely where you can take the free arm off your machine. This one doesn't, so I'm just gonna kind of feed it in here. We could absolutely wrap it around the free arm and sew it really easily. All right, so I'm just gonna go ahead and zigzag. As I zigzag, I'm gonna come down on the left, just off the fabric. So I want to kind of hit the very edge of it and catch that really nicely. So you can kind of come right to the raw edge, and we're just gonna zigzag. We're just gonna zigzag all the way around. So again, I'm just kind of going right along that edge, securing the hat band to the inside of the hat. Okay, so now we'll turn it inside out, and that band has been top stitched on and secured it in place. So you can kind of see this stitching. If you look here, you can see the zigzag showing up just a little bit. I'll tell you, one of my favorite things about this by Annie stiletto is how easy it is to then kind of come in here and fluff up these stitches, and it will hide it. Hide all of those zigzags. So all you see is a nice fluffy band. Okay, so go ahead and I'll kind of scritch up all of those fibers all the way around. Hide all of that top stitching. All right, so now that the hat band is kind of fluffed up, we're gonna go ahead, I'm gonna push this all the way out. I'm not gonna trim this seam up here, and what it's gonna do is kind of cause a little bit of a thick spot right here, which is actually helpful for us when we sew that pom-pom on. So the hat part is done. We're gonna go ahead and make the pom-pom. So we're gonna do that with this circle template that we have. We cut that out. The first thing I'm gonna do is a nice long running stitch around it. So I have a big sewing needle, and I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going to knot my threads here at the bottom. I'm gonna go ahead and just make a knot. I'm gonna make another big one because I want it to hold really nicely in the fabric so that I can kind of tug it. And I'm just gonna stitch a big 1/4 inch running stitch all the way around. All right, so as I work my way around, I'm gonna kind of pull it up just a little bit, get myself a little bit more length with my thread. I just don't want to pull it too tight. I'm gonna do those last few running stitches here. Get it back to the beginning. I'm gonna go ahead and start to pull this. Let it kind of work itself up into a circle. Just not going to pull it too tight. I'm going to put some polyfill in there. So with this one, I'm just using the regular old polyfill, and it is nice and dense and works really well for this. I'm going to pull it apart just a little to give it a little less lumpiness. Feed it in there a bit at a time until it is as full as I want it to be. As you're going, you can kind of pull your threads to see how full it is, see how much more you might need to stuff. Just kind of work your way through until it's as full as you want it to be. There is no prescribed amount, but you might be surprised at how much stuffing you can actually fit into these little shapes. So I'm gonna go ahead and stuff that in there, and then as it gets fuller, I kind of have to pull this a little, or hold it as I'm pulling my threads here, and I'm going to try to pull them gently. Again, I'm using 2 layers of, or 2 threads that are polyester, so I can actually tug it a little bit harder Make sure that you're using a polyester thread because that cotton thread will definitely pop when you do this. So now I've got my little pom-pom. It's about as full as I want it to be. So I'm going to tug this really nice and tight. I'm going to come over and just grab a stitch and kind of lock that in. So pull it and hold that and then bring my thread. I'm going to do this a couple of times, kind of pulling it across to keep that bottom nice and tight here. All right, because we want to make sure that it doesn't start to unfurl on us. Okay, so now as I've gotten that secured, I can let go of it and it's not going to go anywhere. I've got a long enough tail that I can use this to sew it on. If you need to rethread and lock your stitch on, you absolutely can. But now I'm at this point, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to kind of tuck my hat, the little point, right into the end there, and then I'm going to take some nice big whip stitches here and secure the hat onto the pom-pom. You'll notice that you can't really see the stitches, and that works to our advantage because it does not have to be neat and tidy. No one will ever see it again. We're just going to take some big stitches around here. I'm going to make sure that I'm catching the actual pom-pom and down into the hat a little bit. Okay, to make sure that that's nice and secure. I've got a little loose thread. There we go. Okay, so I'm stitching into the pom-pom and then into the hat, and then just going to bring those together to make sure that they are secured. I'm going to go around this twice. Make sure really secure on there, because I know if I give this to a little one to wear on Christmas morning, that pom-pom is going to get some tugging. Go ahead and really secure that. All right, so as I have come around, you're going to stitch around it twice, make sure that it's nice and secure. You can get a little bit of tugging, it'll be all right. We'll massage that pom-pom into a shape we like. I'm going to go ahead and knot this twice, so I'll just take a big stitch and feed my needle back through there. Okay, so get it nice and secure, and instead of just cutting it off there, I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to stab it through the pom-pom out the top and then cut my stitch, or cut my thread there, and it'll pull those threads back in there, hide it, and make sure that I don't actually cut off my knot. Okay. All right, so there we go. Super simple, easy project. I hope that you'll join us next time for the Santa sack, the companion piece for this. Remember that it uses 1 yard of each of these fabrics, so it's a great companion. They're great companion projects to go together. Thanks for joining me here today at Missouri Star Quilt Company. I'm really glad you were here, and I can't wait to make the next project with you. Until then, happy sewing.
Hi everybody, it's Jenny from the Missouri Star Quilt Company. We hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you aren't already part of the Missouri Star Quilt Company family, be sure to subscribe so you won't miss a thing. And if you click that bell, it'll notify you every time a new tutorial comes out. See you next Friday.